Been an intriguing round. As I said, full slate of football back. 9 games, and it just feels like we are sort of slowly on the downhill slope towards what is going to be a wonderful September. We'll start with little snap judgments. I know that Jared Waitley does this better than anyone else, but Josh, as in the one I like, hit me, mate. What do you like?
I'm going to go with a guy I think is one of the most underrated players in the competition right now, and it's John Noble. I just think his build this year has been sensational. I thought he was almost best on ground yesterday at Heritage Bank Stadium. 30 touches, probably the best game I've seen him play. He's played 84 games now. I think we talk about Jai Newcombe coming off the mid-season draft. We think about Marlon Pickett in terms of a 2-time premiership player. But John Noble, I think he's got the pick of the bunch in terms of body of work. 84 games right now. I don't think he plays too many bad ones. 30 touches yesterday. I just think he's undervalued and underrated.
I like it. I'm going with the fact that a man who most people wouldn't recognise if they cross paths with him in the street, me included, should be, if he keeps it up, the Rising Star winner for the season. Not Harry Sheasel, not Will Ashcroft, not all these young midfielders who are doing a fine job and playing good footy in better teams, largely, except for Sheasel. I think Jai Amiss is the Rising Star to this point. He's kicked 29 goals. He's going at better than 2 goals a game, which is hard to do at the peak of your powers, let alone as a skinny, raw-boned key forward without really a big key forward alongside of him. So at the moment, Jai Amiss is my rising star, Cameron.
We don't see people do that, though. Jesse Hogan was the last key forward to win it. He kicked 44 in 2015. 29 now for Jai Amiss. Can he get to 44?
Well, I think he's getting better. Which is obvious, but his season is going north the longer it goes. So he started out slowly. I remember watching him in gather round at Norwood Oval, and he's just one of those forwards who understands the game. He's quite crafty. He's only about 85 kilos, so he needs to put on probably 8 or 10 kilos. But he is 6'5". He plays like he's 6'2", and that's a positive. So if he gets to 45. I can't see why he doesn't win the award. I can't see why he shouldn't win the award.
Does it hurt him? Very deep. Probably got the deepest rookie class, or at least rising star class we've had for a number of years. So if you look at Luke Jackson, who won it a couple of years ago, Jesse Hogan, he was probably only 1 or 2 that you could really push a case for. This year you can find 5 or 6. Does it hurt if Fremantle miss the 8? Because it shouldn't, but will it?
Probably. But it's the least... It should be the award that factors in wins and losses the least, right? It's about a young player who comes in and plies their trade amongst the team. Now, you can mount a great argument that Will Ashcroft is coming in and playing good footy and being impactful for a good team. But you can also mount an argument that that's potentially easier to fit into a good team and good players around you, and you're getting less attention. Now, I would imagine Amos's magnet is the one that gets circled by the opposition defensive coach already. And he's the one that they're saying if you can stop him, and he didn't have a lot of the footy yesterday, but good forwards can have days where they only have 7 touches, but they'll kick 4 goals. And that's what he did yesterday. He takes his chances. So, look, he's up against it. History tells us he's up against it. But I just want to, I don't know who votes for it, but I just want the voters to look wide and look at the big picture in terms of what he's doing with what's around him, because there's not a lot around him, and he's doing a fine job.
You could argue that he's their most important player, because their forward line, since Matthew Pavlich has left, hasn't been able to get to the levels of which you need to be able to win a premiership. I still don't think Fremantle are there quite yet, and I think he needs some help, and I think yesterday's a perfect example of that.
I think they hope Tracy is that big banger, but you've also got to be more than a big banger. You've got to have productivity, and he's struggled to do that yet. So they certainly need... I think they had one more... If they had Taberner at the peak of his powers, say 3 years ago, and then Jackson, and then Amiss, then maybe you've got something. But you are right. They need one more.
My snap is the Adelaide Crows, who were brilliant at the MCG last Sunday against the best team in the league. Outstanding game, and there's an argument based on what the AFL suggested after it that there should have been a free kick for Jordan Dawson. So... too often we see teams get caught up in that. We did, and they had their say. Jordan Dawson said that, along as, I think, Riley O'Brien. But rather than allow it to hurt them into their next game, coming off 6-day break, going back to Adelaide. I know North Melbourne aren't exactly the measuring stick, but good teams, really good teams who are going somewhere, belt the bad teams. And I think we seen it yesterday with Collingwood. And while North Melbourne's first half was pretty decent, Adelaide's second half in particular was powerful. And I think it's a sign of a maturing team that I don't think a lot of people, myself included, thought was going to take that next step, when really they've taken 3 steps in 2023. So Adelaide, they were always going to win. The manner in which they win could have somewhat been dictated by their mental state on the back of last week's close loss. I thought they were brilliant yesterday.
Well, they're now just a game outside the top 4. I mean, that's quite incredible. If they finish 5th or 6th, they get that home final, which is a huge thing for an interstate club.
It's huge for them, isn't it? It's
well,
probably
you would know more than us.
As big. Well, I'm just talking about the way they're currently playing. For them, if they play anyone 7th and 8th, if they play Geelong or whoever who might be the 8th place team, if that's Adelaide's home game, they're favourites. If they say have to play here against an Essendon or a St Kilda, or they're a long shot to win.
Such a big difference, though.
Oh,
6th
for
and
them,
7th,
it's massive.
It's such a big difference.
It's massive for them, and it's massive for all teams. But even saw something the other night. Brisbane, points for and then points conceded when they're on the road. They're basically a 6-goal better team, Brisbane, at the Gabba as to anywhere else. Well, Adelaide, you can probably, I don't know, I haven't seen the numbers. They're probably an 8-goal better team when they're in Adelaide versus what they're like when they're on the road. But last week they would have taken a lot of confidence from the fact, our best does stand up on the road and we can perform on the road. We didn't get the points, but we know that we can do it.
There's a million different ramifications what happens in September, okay? But if they were able to get a home final and then bump into Port somewhere in a second or third week, they would have a great deal of confidence. Port would still be favourites in the way they are playing, and we'll get to Port Adelaide in the next hour. But the fact is that if we were to see, again, a showdown final like we did see, I think, in 2005.
It's happened once.
I think it was 2005 when Adelaide belted Port Adelaide as the reigning premiers. But if they were to get there, and they've still got another showdown to go, Adelaide would garner a great deal of confidence of staying at home, even though Port Adelaide have been the better team. It would be, it's a fairy tale of the year, and I know that coming out of Adelaide in the preseason, there was a lot of internal confidence that a lot of people externally didn't share, and now we're seeing it week in, week out as to why those Crows, coaching staff and everyone else was so bullish.
Well, just on the coaching staff, does Matthew Nicks have a claim for Coach of the Year at this point? I know we've still got 2 months of the season to play, but if you look at the build, 3 wins, 7 wins, 8 wins, I mean, I don't even think they have to finish top 4 for him to be firmly in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, who else would be... Trying to think of the other candidates.
I mean, Ken's won 12 in a row.
Oh, yeah.
And Craig McRae's doing what Craig McRae has done. But just in terms of where they've come from, he's got to be a name in that conversation.
Yeah, he'd be in the mix. He'd be hard pressed if Port win 15 in a row. You'd be hard pressed to look past him. And Craig McRae, we're probably already taking him for granted, aren't we? What he does, and he's clearly a special individual with the way that I was listening to him last week speak about sitting on the couch and making videos for his players and how much he loves doing that. So he's clearly a special individual, and they are in sync like no one else at the moment. So, there's a couple. But, yeah, for sure, Matthew Nixon, he's been under pressure over there. He's always under pressure over there. But I think I think he has opened himself up. He's been one of those coaches who is just, contest. If you can't if you can't smash in, then you can't play for us. Now I think he's opened his mind up to that. James Rowley has had a big impact going over there as a forward coach and just opening the game up, letting Rankin and Fogarty and Walker and Rochelle play with a bit more flair and let those guys be what they are, which is exciting and offensively minded. So certainly they're building a good thing.
I want to give a shout out to Riley O'Brien, who's had an outstanding season. I think Tim English, in the eyes of many, if not all, is probably the All-Australian ruckman so far. And if he continues to do what he does, he will be. But Riley O'Brien, Jared Witzak, two off radar, I guess, or at least when it comes to us Victorians, probably a little out of sight, out of mind at different times. Jared Witz has been really good for a couple of years, but Riley O'Brien's year this year is a huge reason as to why Adelaide is so good in the middle of the ground.
Well, he absolutely dominated Todd Goldstein.
Yeah, he did.
And Callum Coleman-Jones yesterday, 52 headouts. I thought he was phenomenal. It's a great point. I just think he's underappreciated. He does go under the radar. Jared Witt, I mean, they've both won best and fairest. So internally they're not underrated. But I just think you know what you get from Riley O'Brien. He's full effort. He's such an impressive person off the field, and he gives you everything. I think it's a really good point.
He got dropped last year, so his form was mixed for a while. There's having played over there when he was just coming through, he's coming from Sam Jacobs, who was a fine craftsman in the ruck, great touch, whereas Riley is more that bullocking style, just the longer the game goes, the better he gets. But his touch is not amazing. He's got a really awkward kicking style. But, he was left out of the side last year for a week or so, responded as they knew he would, and he hasn't looked back since. So certainly they're a really good team when he's up and about, because he can be, he's not going to be like English and Goldstein at their best with that silky ball use and creativity. But what he does is he gives you meters gain and he sets the tone around the footy.
All right, Tex Walker better than most, both as a footballer and personally. He's having an outstanding year. He has never been an All-Australian. He leads the Coleman. Right now, is he in the All-Australian team?
Yeah. Well, the Coleman medal winner has to be at full forward. It's hard to...
Big shout-out to SENWA Scotty Cummings. He's still filthy about the fact. Won the Coleman in 99 and didn't make All-Australian.
That just doesn't make any sense to me.
It's ridiculous.
he still holds a grudge on Mike Sheehan. He'd be listening right now.
He rightfully should, particularly if he never got a gong. But, no, Tex is playing well. I was pleased to see Fogarty stand up. His past sort of 2 months had really plateaued big time. So it was good to see him kick a nice little bag there and just remind himself and remind everyone that he's still got a part to play, because the longer the season goes, the harder it's going to get for Tex. He is 33. So, they needed Fogarty to stand up, and he did so yesterday.
They did a good job, and we spoke about this, JJ, at the time, when they didn't really take a great deal of players to Ballarat to take on the Western Bulldogs. Tex Walker was one of those, and we had the conversation about it. They're going to have to find a game or maybe two to manage him in the second half of the year, right? Because this September run is when they need him playing the footy he's playing now.
That's right, and they haven't. And I'm a big believer, Josh, in a lot of people say, well, hang on, he's got the pre-finals bye, but when you're an older player or a younger player, I think there's a sweet spot for some players who can just charge on, but you can get to the point of fatigue where that pre-finals bye comes too late and you've already tipped over the edge. So I think Geelong showed probably over the top how to do it last year and really just forcing rests upon guys. But even Sloan, who played well yesterday, but he'd been pretty quiet before that. So if they can rest a couple of those guys, Brodie Smith might benefit from a rest some of those guys, but still pick up a win. Maybe do it in a bit better fashion than at Ballarat against the Dogs. Pick a team that you're pretty confident you're going to beat, which is hard, but certainly those guys could do with a rest.
Just 1 second, though. Taylor Walker is 4 goals clear in the Coleman medal. He's never won a Coleman. You touched on he's never been All-Australian. He's been in the squad 4 times. Is there any chance he wants to have a week off?
Well, he wouldn't, but what else hasn't he ever won?
A premiership, of course.
So, I mean, hopefully, I'd be saying if I was Matthew Nicks, I'd be saying, well, mate, get yourself 6 clear in the second last game, because you ain't going to be playing it. And that's because they do. Cam's
you know
right.
who they've got in round 24?
West Coast.
Well,
the only problem there is Tex's argument is, well, I don't need 2 weeks off in a row because you've got the pre-finals bye. So he'll be, I think, round 23, you might not see him. Round 24 against West Coast, you'll see him over in Perth looking for 6 or 7, and you won't see him pass too many. And then he might get that break again. I just think you're better off at that age we see so many 30-plus-year-olds have a week off, come back and really play with such... they just get a lot of that freshness and that explosiveness back that sometimes gets taken from them when they've got a few bumps and bruises.
Good special would it be, though, if he was to win a Coleman medal at 33? He's played north of 250 games now. How special would that be? I mean, because we haven't seen him win one before. To do it at that age, it would be phenomenal.
Well, it would be. And to be honest, back in 2018-19, he was gone. He was absolutely gone. He was really struggling, and the team was struggling, and he was having issues with his body, just hips and feet issues, and just a nagging hamstring issue here or there. But the game's changed a little bit for him, but he certainly blossomed with a few more opportunities in one-on-one situations, having Rankin and you can really liken that forward line now to the forward line that got to a grand final in 2017 with Rankin and Rochelle, and you've got guys who are making the game easier for him, and he just makes the most of every opportunity. He barely misses a set shot, so he's in fine form.
Last night, the game that he was a big part of late was a great game. Essendon were great, Port Adelaide were better. Dan Houston from 55 metres takes the mark, 16 seconds to go, and he didn't want a bar of anything else. He had the confidence in himself, the confidence of Ken Hinkley, the confidence from Trent McKenzie, who said, I'll still love you even if you miss it, and Port Adelaide win their 12th straight.
Yeah, it was a phenomenal finish, and I was fortunate enough. I listened the AFL Nation call, and John Donoghue was fantastic on the call, as was Joe Watton, and I was able to get home with the last quarter to go, and Port just kicked away, and I thought, okay, well, I'll turn the TV off and I'll go and jump into bed. But Essendon, to their credit, just stuck at it. And to be honest, they'll walk away just bitterly disappointed they didn't win the game, particularly for where they sit and what it looks like for September action for them. Could be one that got away, or will be one that got away, but could cost them dearly late in the game. But I just was astounded at Houston's just immediate thought process, the composure, and get this. Naturally, you get back and you just want to hoist it in there. Now, clearly, he's marked that ball 50.5 metres from goal. The siren goes, so therefore that, pinching that meterage beside the man on the mark is gone, because I was thinking that was probably the difference. I thought, well, if this was midway through the quarter, he'd get the journey because he'd be able to pinch that 2 metres beside the man on the mark before he gets called to play on, and then before the man on the mark can move. But to have to kick it over the top of him, he got a half a metre on the angle, but he didn't play on. You couldn't possibly imagine if they called that to play on. But to be able to have the composure, the coolness, and the leg to kick that goal, to me, it's goal of the year.
My favourite part of this is this winning streak started at the SCG in a very similar moment. By 2 inches, Ollie Florence ball dropped short. Aliria swatted it away. And last night, Dan Houston, he needed 2 inches and he got it. So 12 in a row. It is remarkable what this football club's doing.
You mentioned the fact that, and there's no way the AFL or an umpire would call play on, but he was also acutely aware of the fact that by standing a little inside the mark, he could use the hook, and he still kicks over the mark.
That's the rule that they changed rightly a few years ago. So, for a lot of players who take the set shot snaps, you're allowed to step off your line, so make the angle worse, but to come back to your line. So it makes sense to me. And he was aware of that. He was. I think you can take a bit of a liberty, the same as you can now. Everything on the line was all above board, but it's almost, look, let's go over and above to block on the line. If they're not going to call a free kick, that's the thing. The umpire's like, please don't make me call a free kick to end the game on a block or on a play on from the kick. So everything that Port Adelaide did was incredibly smart, the composure and the drama, and that's why I do think it is goal of the year, Cam, because of there's nothing in the criteria of goal of the year that goal didn't have last night.
There's 2 things that should happen with the goal of the year. One,
he should win it, is one.
One is finals should be included. I don't work out why finals aren't included, because at times they are the biggest moments of which people have to kick goals and handle so much of the pressure, be it scoreboard or over the fence. And I agree. Goals after the siren don't get the kudos because someone gets it on the boundary and check sides it from 55, and they are great goals. But Dan Houston going back, backing himself in, needs to be celebrated, and it certainly needs to be celebrated, certainly as goal of the week and goal of the year so far.
This is a great test for the voting public of Australia.
Well, if it
Jamie Elliott was pretty special a couple of hours earlier.
That's the big thing, right? I was actually thinking...
That was more mercurial.
When he did that, I was half going to push most certainly that is goal of the week based on what he was able to do. To think he's a very instinctive footballer, but to be able to do it in the moment, then Dan Houston, that's certainly goal of the week. And if not, there needs to be a revamp of the way we find goal of the week and nominees for goal of the year.
Let's park the goal with Dan Houston. So last night he has 32 touches, 15 contested. If you look at his season overall, he's got a compelling case now to be All-Australian for the first time. This is a guy that was taken at pick 46 in the rookie draft back in 2015. He looks like an All-Australian player right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I am one for rewarding players in good teams. So this, we spoke about the rising star, and I made the argument that I think it's the award that relies least on wins and losses, whereas I think All-Australian, the wins and losses of your team should really be a strong factor. So, if Dan Houston, they're looking at Dan Houston on a halfback flank against someone who might have superior numbers but is in a team that's finished 14th. Let's just say Jake Lloyd, right? Let's say Sydney finished 14th. Jake Lloyd, incredible numbers, fine players, been an All-Australian. And if he was put there, no one would really ask a question. But I think rewarding Dan Houston, whose numbers might just be a little bit inferior, but overall impact on the growth of Port Adelaide, I think that's something that the All-Australian voters should think about. Now, Kane Corns is a voter for the second time, so he'll get in.
He will.
But he's a very smart player. He's a very good kick. He often sits, and they use him quite well. He sits off the back of a lot of stoppages. He's sort of that high defender, if you like, who takes proactive positioning. And to be honest, a lot of the forward scouting would be, where do you stand to try and make Houston accountable for you, even though you're the forward? And that's they're the dangerous types of players. And last night, probably best player on the ground.
It's not really breaking the mould to suggest that for teams to be really good and have a crack at a premiership, guys have to have career years or have to take that level. And Collingwood did it last year, and they fell that tad short. Geelong, Sydney, you got guys who are on the periphery who are threatening to be good, who be good. Port Adelaide have a lot of them. Now, Butters is a genuine Brownlow medalist. Rosie was already good as an All-Australian. Horne-Francis, early in his career, but has been great. You mentioned Dan Houston. Bergman's having an unbelievable year. You have a look at someone like Powell Pepper, who plays a big role. And even in the last quarter last night, he loved the conditions. The rain was here. He just loves the body contact. You have 5, 6, 7, 8 guys. Alira's bounced back and had a really good year.
Had a good year.
Finlayson is an argument to be in the All-Australian squad of 40.
I'd love to see
him squeezing in.
Again, for that same reason, that rewarding the excellence of the team. Finlayson on an interchange bench would be fine, because, if it was a real game, which it's not, he could play forward, he could chip into the ruck. So, I'm hearing you. They've got so many guys who are playing above what we've seen from them in their careers.
Kane Farrell was the one for me last night who really did stand up. And he's not going to be in that All-Australian discussion, but he's having a career year, and you need those players to rise.
You mentioned the sliding doors moment. They were zipping 3. They were 4 goals down against Sydney. Sydney had injuries, and I think it was concussion, and they lost their defenders, and then they had a shot to win. Had that have gone an extra metre, and they're zipping 4, the pressure intensifies on Ken Hinkley more. The confidence doesn't grow, because these players, and Dan Houston's a great example of the confidence that Ken instills and solidifies within those players to play great footy. Zipping 4 compared to just coming off a showdown loss compared to now 12. It is literally in this situation a game of 40 centimetres or so.
I think it would have been all over. I called the Sydney Port game for Power Nation, ironically, and their first 20 minutes was so bad. You couldn't believe how bad Port were playing. They were kicking along the ground, and it was, Tom Jonas was really struggling. We haven't really seen him for a fair while. They've just decided that he's not a part of their best side, and he is their captain. It's been a bold move, but it's been the right move. I seriously think he may have been gone that week if they continue with that performance on the back of the showdown where they were. They're thinking, season's over, the heat of Adelaide and what that brings. They haven't lost since. Have not lost since.
It's an amazing situation, and Port Adelaide right now, when you're talking premiership contenders, they're most certainly in it.
Have to be now.
Is there a top 4 then a gap, or do you have Melbourne still half a tier off Brisbane, Port Adelaide, and Collingwood? Or do you have concerns about the Brisbane MCG thing? Where do you sit when we're talking premiership contenders as we sit here today?
I'm with you, Cam. I think there is a top 4, and then there is a gap. And I'm not as concerned with Brisbane's MCG record, because they don't play here too often, and they won a final here last year. So yes, they did lose their most recent appearance against Hawthorn. They were disappointing.
Stuart Dew deflated, not for the first time in his coaching career, a Gold Coast Suns team that continually teases us. The potential is there, but the post-bye blues for the Gold Coast Suns has been fairly evident in the stats in the last couple of years, and yesterday was a really disappointing effort at home. Against the best team in the league, they were belted from the opening bounce, and the Pies do what they do. We'll put them to the corner for 1 second, because let's talk about the Gold Coast Suns, and we'll start with you, Josh. Not you, JJ, the other Josh. It is incredibly disappointing, and you could hear it in the voice there from Stewie Dew, because we do all expect at some point this team is going to take the next step. Sure as hell doesn't look like so far it's going to be this year. Well,
this felt like a final for that football club in July, and they sold it out. They were a couple of thousand short, and I think if you look at what happened with Virgin Airlines yesterday, they lost them in Melbourne. They didn't make it up, obviously, but they were incredibly disappointing. Straight from the start, I mean, you look, 1 goal in the first half, but it was 94-10 at one point. So the final margin, I mean, it was under 80 points in the end. It felt like triple figures to me. And if you think about the spectre of Damien Hardwick, that's only going to get louder this week, because for the first time since he walked away, we've now heard that he wants to coach again. He said that on Dylan Buckley's podcast earlier in the week. So that's only going to get noisier this week.
I didn't like. He was a really defeated man last night. The vision of him on the bench as well, very animated. If I was advising him, which I'm not, surprisingly enough, I would just love him to hold that in a little bit more. If I'm listening, if I'm a board member or a decision maker for Gold Coast, and I am like, oh geez, I think we'd be a good team with Damien Hardwick, but this guy's going all right. If I'm hearing him say things like we were frazzled, we were beaten in our mindset, we weren't resilient, I'm thinking, well, why? Well, it must be we pay you to teach them to be that. Now, I think he should have just said, look, we got smashed in contested possession, and the rest of the game doesn't matter because when you get smashed in contested possession by that much, then that's what happens to the game. So it felt like he couldn't keep his emotions inside him last night, and last night might have been one of those times where he just had to keep it inside and not let it out.
He's a hard on his sleeve type of coach. We did see him speak at halftime a couple of weeks ago when Carlton belted them in that second quarter, and he was visibly disappointed. And I don't mind it. I understand where you're coming from. It does mean a great deal to him because he's coaching for his future, and there's a great deal of disappointment when his young Chargers, who he no doubt believes is going in the right way. In fact, he spoke about the fact he believes they could be a potential top 4 side in 2024. So I understand what you're saying, but I don't think the public persona or public words changes those internal conversations that they are having. They're no doubt, from Stuart Dew to everyone behind the scenes and the players themselves, bitterly disappointing. Have we overstated the list? It feels like we've done this ever since they've come into the league with their draft concessions and the talented players they have had. But when we look at the list, right, when they go out there and actually play football, are we overstating the potential or the skill of some of these players?
Oh, it's not a bad point because we've been celebrating how many first-round picks they've had for a long time, and some of them just haven't quite come on. I mean, Ben King is the one. I mean, he's been sensational coming off the ACL, but he's just tapered in recent times. I mean, it's a huge challenge to come back from an ACL, and the way he performed in the first half of the year was extraordinary when you think about how much football he'd missed, but they're just not getting contribution, are they?
He leaves a lot of chances out on the field, and that's a frustrating way to play. I was having a bit of fun in the call, did their game last week, and thinking about Levi Casbolt and even Ben King's decision with the contract is how many marks do you drop in the Gold Coast because it's so humid? And he seems to drop a fair few that you potentially wouldn't drop if you're in Melbourne where the ball's not so slippery all the time. But he does leave a few chances out there. He doesn't make the most of his opportunities. We talk about Jai Amiss, a young player who does make the most of his opportunities. You know, basically every touch he had yesterday was a goal. So King's not quite that player. I've got a lot of time for him. I love him as a player. I think he's so versatile. He's good overhead. He's not as good as Max in the air, but he's better at other things. He's got better dexterity at ground level and movement, but certainly he didn't have his best day yesterday. But again, and to my point about Stuart Dew, when you get smashed up around the ball like that, and it's your strength, well, I don't know what else you expect some of those guys ahead of the footy to do. It's not a secret. When you look at Holman, who plays ahead of the ball, you look at King, you look at Casbolt, you look at Humphrey, you look at 5 or 6 of their forwards who have had no impact in the game. Well, it's not a coincidence. When you're getting belted around the ball and belted up at your greatest asset and your greatest strength, well, that's what happens to you.
JJ, the loss of Tuke Miller this year has been enormous. I mean, he's looking to come back next week, but if you look at the last 3 weeks, so the big loss yesterday, and a fortnight ago at this ground against Carlton, they were listless, just lacking Tuke Miller. I just feel like they do lack leadership. I mean, Jared Witts is out there at the moment. He's the co-captain. David Swallow's the former captain. He's out there. But other than that, we've got Noah Anderson and Matt Rowe coming through, but just the depth of leadership.
My view on them has been I was really fascinated to look at the time on ground because, you know, having spent time looking at them from an opposition point of view, and if I put my Cat's hat on for a minute, you look at the midfielders around the competition, and a lot of them play 75%. We look at Nick Dacos last week, played 75%. Game time was the best player on the ground. You think, well, naturally you think, well, how good would he be if you played him for longer? But the reason you don't play them for longer is because you take away their burst. You take away their ability to explode and to run, and you see what it did for Dangerfield last year, starting him on the bench, and then you bring him on when everyone's just had the edge taken off them, and you're so dynamic. Whereas for a long time, the Suns midfielders, Rowell, Miller, Anderson, and Witts would basically play low 90%. And you just wear them down. They're great players. They're competitors. They'll try forever. But eventually you just wear them down with throw 6 or 7 or 8 midfielders at them. Now, their numbers, Rowell played 83, which is still high, but it's come down a little bit. Anderson was 85, and Witts was 83%. Clearly the guys coming in, Fiorini and Ainsworth, were fantastic last week. Nowhere to be seen last night. Now, I think their depth is where they need to improve. Their good players are good players, but Ellis has been in and out of the team this year. Well has been in and out of the team this year. Rory Atkins hasn't been able to lock down a spot. He was good in the second half, but I think some of their sort of, call them their B-grade players, they're players who roll through half forward and then get a chance through the middle. I think that's where they need to improve.
Who makes the 8 first? The Suns or do the Giants get back there? Because the Giants seem to, in the last month, have done a really good job of all of a sudden garnering excitement and the way they're playing their football. Some of their older guys have found form again and probably, not to say they're on the downhill slope, but, Toby Green's always Toby Green. But guys like Josh Kelly's had a great year. Lockie Whitfield. Caniglio's had his better year for the last 3 or 4 years. And there's a sense of feeling that the Giants have been able to revitalise. If they got back to the 8 before the Suns ever made it, it would be a bad look for this Gold Coast team.
Well, I'm a huge believer in what Adam Kingsley's doing at the Giants. I actually think they could play finals this year. I'm just concerned about the Gold Coast Suns. This is season 13 for them, and they get to this point in the year, and I think their season's over now.
Yeah, I agree.
I can't see them playing finals. They've got Port next weekend.
In Port, by the way.
In Port. I just can't see them coming back. That's why yesterday felt so important. They sold out the game for the first time since 2014. It just felt critical for them to show, hey, we're still in this, and we've still got something to play for in the back end.
Yeah, I gave him just the smallest of outside chances.
Based on
the same reason I gave Essendon a massive chance last night. Sometimes you are also expecting Gold Coast to rise to the challenge, which they didn't.
They had more to play for.
But also Collingwood, it wouldn't have surprised me if Collingwood just played at 60%. And it wouldn't have surprised me if Port, who I think Port did play in about fourth gear, for a few different reasons, but the cream ultimately rises. But the Gold Coast Collingwood performance, Collingwood brought their A game. Credit to them, they're just an elite group of operators at the moment. But just to see them offer nothing was bitterly disappointing.
Before we get to a break, the Damien Hardwick comments during the course of the week sort of solidified what everyone was starting to think might be the case at some point, even if it did come sooner rather than later, and Stuart Dew and the fact they haven't been able to continually win or at least show up in some of these bigger games. Do you want to, either you two gentlemen, want to hear from someone within the board level of the Gold Coast Suns, someone who can stand up for Stuart Dew publicly? Because right now that conversation's going to continue. Should we hear from someone outside of Stuart Dew, someone making the actual decisions on the coach going forward?
I don't know, because what if they're truly sitting back thinking, well, we don't know we're probably not sure he is the guy. Or we're probably thinking if Hardwick wants to come here, then we probably should go get a three-time premiership coach.
That's what silence says, right? That's what we assume. That's what the silence says.
Well, we assume that, but I don't know what coming out and I think would be if someone came out and gave a call it a pretend backing of Stuart Dew, I think we'd be able to see through it.
Well, Mark Evans gave him his support last week. He's the CEO. We haven't heard from Bob East, to replace Tony Cochrane as chairman only a couple of months ago. So when you see a major leadership change like that, often you do see some personnel changes. And I would think that if Damien Hardwick is prepared to go to Queensland, you'd have to really consider him clearly